He came to that forgotten place, carrying only his pain and a plan to end everything in silence. But the cry of a newborn baby shattered his last night on Earth. Dakota Whitehorse drove through the desert highway, with nothing but silence filling the truck cabin. The land stretched endlessly before him, dry and cracked under the merciless sun, mirroring the emptiness he carried inside. His weathered hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary, knuckles pale against his copper skin. He was a man who had lost everything that mattered, and now he was heading toward the one place where he could finally disappear. Years ago, Dakota had been someone different. He had a family, a purpose, a reason to wake up every morning. His wife, Ayita, had filled their small home with laughter and warmth. His daughter, little Kimimela, had eyes that sparkled like morning stars. They were his entire world, his reason for breathing. But life has a cruel way of taking away the things we hold most precious. A terrible accident on a rain-soaked road had stolen them both in a single, devastating moment. The details didn't matter anymore. What mattered was the unbearable weight of their absence, the suffocating silence that had replaced their voices. The authorities had called it a tragedy. The community had offered their condolences. But words meant nothing when you returned to an empty house every night, when you set the table for 3 out of habit and remembered with crushing force that you were utterly alone. Dakota had tried to continue. He had gone through the motions of living, working at the lumber mill, attending the ceremonies, nodding politely when people asked how he was doing. But inside, he was already dead. His heart had stopped beating the day he buried them. That's when he made his decision. He would find a place far from everyone, somewhere forgotten and abandoned, just like him. He would go there, and he would let go. No more pain, no more memories, no more waking up to realize they were still gone. He had heard about the old cabin deep in the Arizona wilderness, miles from the nearest town. It had belonged to a prospector who died decades ago, leaving nothing but rotting wood and shattered dreams. Perfect, Dakota thought. A fitting place for a man with nothing left. The drive took hours. He passed through small towns that barely registered in his consciousness, their signs and buildings blurring into meaningless shapes. When he finally turned onto the dirt road leading to the cabin, the sun was beginning its descent, painting the desert sky in shades of orange and crimson. The landscape grew wilder, more desolate. Sagebrush and twisted juniper trees dotted the rocky terrain. In the distance, red canyon walls rose like ancient guardians of forgotten secrets. The cabin appeared suddenly, hunched against the hillside like a wounded animal seeking shelter. It was worse than he had imagined. The roof sagged dangerously, the walls leaned at unnatural angles, and the windows were either broken or missing entirely. Nature had already begun reclaiming it, with wild vines creeping through the cracks and bird nests wedged in the corners. It was perfect. This would be his final resting place. Dakota parked the truck and stepped out, stretching his stiff limbs. The evening air carried a chill that cut through his worn jacket. He grabbed the small bag from the passenger seat, everything he needed for what came next, and walked toward the cabin door. It hung loosely on rusted hinges, groaning in protest as he pushed it open. The interior was dark, musty, filled with the smell of decay and abandonment. Dust particles danced in the fading light streaming through the broken windows. An old table stood crookedly in the corner, a toppled chair beside it. The floorboards creaked ominously beneath his weight. He set his bag down and stood in the center of the room, taking it all in. This was it. Tomorrow, when the sun rose one last time, he would join Ayita and Kimimela. The pain would finally end. He would find peace, or at least the absence of suffering. Dakota closed his eyes, imagining their faces one more time, feeling the familiar ache spread through his chest. That's when he heard it. A sound so unexpected, so impossibly out of place, that his eyes snapped open immediately. It was faint, but unmistakable. The cry of a baby. His entire body went rigid. Was he imagining it? Had his grief finally driven him to madness? But no, there it was again. A tiny, desperate wail coming from somewhere deeper in the cabin. His heart, which he thought had stopped feeling anything, suddenly began pounding against his ribs. Dakota moved toward the sound, his boots echoing on the hollow floor. There was a doorway leading to what must have been a back room. He stepped through carefully, and what he saw made him freeze completely. Huddled in the corner, wrapped in a threadbare blanket, was a young woman clutching an infant to her chest. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with terror as they met his. She looked barely old enough to be out of school, her dark hair tangled and dirty, her clothes torn and stained. The baby in her arms couldn't have been more than a few days old, its tiny face red and scrunched as it cried. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The woman trembled, pulling her child closer, clearly expecting the worst. Dakota stood frozen, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. He had come here to die alone, to escape the world and everyone in it. But the universe, it seemed, had different plans. The silence stretched between them like a fragile thread ready to snap. Dakota's mind raced, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. The young woman pressed herself harder against the wall, her whole body shaking. The baby's cries grew weaker, more desperate, as if the infant sensed the fear surrounding them both. Dakota slowly raised his hands, palms forward, the universal gesture of peace. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said quietly, his voice rough from disuse. The woman's eyes darted toward the doorway behind him, calculating whether she could run. But she was exhausted, that much was clear. Her legs trembled beneath her, and the way she held the baby suggested she barely had the strength left to stand. Dakota took a careful step back, giving her space. "When did you last eat?" The question seemed to catch her off guard. Her lips parted, but no sound came out at first. Finally, she whispered, "I don't remember." Her voice was thin, fragile as spider silk. The baby whimpered against her chest, and she looked down with such profound sadness that Dakota felt something crack inside him. He recognized that look. It was the same one he saw in the mirror every morning, the face of someone who had given up hope. He returned to the main room and retrieved his bag. Inside, he had packed some supplies, simple things he thought he wouldn't need after tonight. Bread, dried meat, a canteen of water. He brought them back to the doorway and set them on the floor, then backed away again. "Eat," he said simply. "Please." She stared at the food like it might disappear if she blinked. Then, moving slowly, she shifted the baby to one arm and reached for the bread with her free hand. The first bite seemed to awaken something in her, and suddenly she was eating with desperate hunger, tears streaming down her face. Dakota turned away, giving her privacy in this vulnerable moment. He walked to the broken window and stared out at the darkening desert. What was he supposed to do now? This wasn't part of his plan. He had come here to end his story, not to stumble into someone else's tragedy. But standing there, listening to the quiet sounds of the woman eating and the baby's cries softening, he found himself unable to leave. Not yet. Not while they were in such desperate need. After some time, she spoke again. "My name is Halona." Her voice was stronger now, steadier. Dakota turned to look at her. She had moved to sit on the floor, the baby nursing beneath the blanket. Her eyes, though still wary, held less terror now. "I didn't think anyone would come here. This place looked abandoned." "It is abandoned," Dakota replied. He leaned against the doorframe, keeping his distance. "That's why I came." He didn't elaborate, and she didn't ask. Perhaps she understood more than he realized. "How did you get here? There's nothing around for miles." Alona looked down at her child, one finger gently stroking the infant's tiny hand. "I walked for days while I was still carrying him. I gave birth here, in this cabin, alone. I was so scared, had nowhere else to go." Her voice cracked slightly. "My family, they didn't want me anymore. Not after they found out about him." She glanced at the baby with such tender love that it made Dakota's chest ache. "They said I brought shame to them. They told me to leave and never come back." The words hung in the air, heavy with pain and rejection. Dakota felt anger stirring in his gut, a feeling he hadn't experienced in a long time. What kind of people would cast out their own daughter, would abandon a mother and newborn child to the wilderness? He thought about his own daughter, his Kimimela. He would have moved mountains for her, would have protected her against anything. The thought of turning her away was incomprehensible. "The baby's father?" he asked carefully. Alona's jaw tightened. "Gone. He made promises, but when things got difficult, he disappeared like smoke." She blinked rapidly, fighting back tears. I'm alone. We're alone. Dakota understood that feeling better than anyone. He moved slowly into the room and sat down against the opposite wall, far enough to not threaten her, close enough to talk without raising his voice. I lost my family too, he heard himself say. The words emerged before he could stop them. My wife and daughter, they were everything to me, and then they were gone. Alona looked at him with new understanding, seeing past his weathered exterior to the broken man beneath. I'm sorry, she whispered. 2 simple words, but somehow they carried more weight than all the elaborate condolences he had received after the accident. Perhaps because she truly understood loss, truly knew what it meant to have your world shattered. The night deepened around them. Dakota found some old boards and managed to start a small fire in the rusted metal stove he discovered in the corner. It wasn't much, but it provided warmth and a flickering light that pushed back the darkness. Alona fell asleep sitting up, her head tilted back against the wall, the baby secure in her arms. Dakota watched them, these 2 fragile lives that had somehow crossed his path at the exact moment he had planned to leave the world behind. The universe had a strange sense of timing, he thought. He had come here carrying death in his heart, and instead found life in its most vulnerable form. What was he supposed to do with that? The question kept him awake, long into the night, staring at the dying embers of the fire, feeling something he hadn't felt in years beginning to stir inside him. Not hope, not yet, but perhaps the faintest possibility that his story wasn't quite finished. Morning light crept through the broken windows, painting golden stripes across the dusty floor. Dakota woke with a start, momentarily disoriented. For a brief, painful moment, he forgot where he was and why. Then reality crashed back, along with something else, the sound of the baby crying. He sat up quickly, his back protesting after a night on the hard floor. Across the room, Alona was awake, trying to soothe the infant with trembling hands. He's hungry, she said, her voice thick with worry. But I don't think I have enough milk. I haven't been eating properly, and I feel so weak. The desperation in her eyes cut through Dakota like a blade. This wasn't just about her anymore. An innocent life hung in the balance. A tiny human who had done nothing wrong, but be born into difficult circumstances. Dakota stood, his joints cracking. He hadn't expected to wake up this morning, hadn't planned for a tomorrow. Yet here he was, and here they were, and suddenly his personal plans seemed insignificant compared to their immediate need. I passed a small town on the way here, he said. Silver Creek. It's about an hour's drive. I can get supplies. Alona's eyes widened. You would do that? For us? The disbelief in her voice told him everything about what she had experienced lately, about how many people had turned their backs on her. Dakota nodded, not trusting his voice. He grabbed his truck keys and headed out, leaving before he could overthink the decision. The drive to Silver Creek felt different than it had the day before. Yesterday, everything had been filtered through the gray fog of his despair. Today, despite everything, the desert seemed more vivid. He noticed the way the morning sun illuminated the red rocks, how a hawk circled lazily overhead, the resilient patches of wildflowers blooming despite the harsh conditions, life persisting against all odds. At the general store, an old establishment called Sunrise Mercantile, he filled a basket with essentials, formula for the baby, canned goods, bread, medical supplies, clean blankets. The elderly woman at the counter, whose name tag read Martha, gave him a curious look, but didn't ask questions. Small towns had a way of minding their own business, at least to strangers' faces. As he loaded the supplies into his truck, a man approached him. He was middle-aged, wearing a sheriff's deputy uniform, his expression friendly but watchful. Morning, the deputy said. Name's Carson. Don't think I've seen you around here before. Dakota kept his voice neutral. Just passing through. Deputy Carson nodded slowly, his eyes taking in the supplies visible through the truck window. Lot of baby items there. Got a little one? The question was casual, but Dakota sensed the undertone. Was someone looking for Alona? Had her family reported her missing? He chose his words carefully. Helping someone out, friend who needed some things. It wasn't exactly a lie. Deputy Carson studied him for a moment longer, then smiled and tipped his hat. Well, that's kind of you. We need more folks willing to help each other out. He started to walk away, then paused. Say, if you or your friend need anything, the community center runs an assistance program. No questions asked, just people helping people. He handed Dakota a card with an address, in case you need it. Dakota pocketed the card and drove back to the cabin, his mind working through what had just happened. The deputy had been fishing for information, that much was clear, but he had also offered help without judgment. It was a reminder that the world wasn't entirely cruel, even if it often felt that way. When he returned, Helona was attempting to clean the cabin with a torn piece of cloth, the baby sleeping in a makeshift nest of blankets. She looked up as he entered, hope and anxiety mixing on her face. Dakota set down the supplies, and her eyes filled with tears when she saw what he had brought. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered, clutching the formula container like it was made of gold. "You saved us. You saved my son." She looked at the sleeping infant. "I want to name him. I've been too scared to name him. Like if I did, something terrible would happen. But I want to call him Nahuel. It means tiger. Because he's strong, even though he's so small." Dakota felt something shift in his chest. A name made everything more real, more permanent. This wasn't just a temporary situation anymore. These weren't just abstract people he had stumbled upon. This was Helona and Nahuel, a mother and son fighting to survive. Over the following days, something unexpected happened. Dakota found himself fixing the cabin. He patched the roof with materials he bought on another trip to town. He repaired the door, cleaned out the debris, made the space livable. Helona grew stronger with proper food, and baby Nahuel began to thrive. They fell into a careful rhythm, not quite a family, but not strangers either. Something in between. Helona proved to be quick to learn. Dakota showed her how to identify edible plants in the surrounding desert, how to preserve water, how to read the signs of changing weather. She absorbed everything with fierce determination, clearly wanting to be self-sufficient, to never be helpless again. In teaching her, Dakota rediscovered parts of himself he thought were dead. The knowledge passed down from his grandfather, the survival skills of his people, the connection to the land that had always been his heritage. One evening, as they sat outside watching the sunset paint the sky in impossible colors, Helona spoke softly. "Why were you really here, Dakota? That first night. You said you came because this place was abandoned. But there was something else, wasn't there?" He was quiet for a long moment, watching Nahuel sleep peacefully in Helona's arms. Finally, he answered with honesty. "I came here to die. I had lost everything, and I didn't see the point in continuing." He heard her sharp intake of breath. "But then I found you. Both of you. And I don't know what that means yet." Helona reached over and placed her hand on his, a simple gesture of understanding. "Maybe it means you were supposed to save us. Or maybe we were supposed to save you. Maybe both." She smiled, sad but genuine. "My grandmother used to say that when we think our path has ended, the spirits sometimes place new footsteps before us. We just have to be brave enough to take them." Dakota looked at her, this young woman who had been rejected and abandoned, yet somehow still carried hope. He looked at baby Nahuel, innocent and depending on them for everything. And he felt something he hadn't felt since the accident. Purpose. Not happiness. Not yet. The grief was still there, still heavy. But underneath it, like a seed buried in dark soil, was the possibility of meaning again. The days blended into weeks, each one bringing small changes. The cabin transformed from decay into a shelter filled with life. Dakota had never planned to stay, yet here he was, making improvements, planning for tomorrows he hadn't thought he would see. Helona grew stronger and more confident with each passing day. Nahuel thrived, his tiny features becoming more defined, his eyes beginning to focus on the faces above him. Sometimes Dakota would catch himself smiling at the baby's expressions, then feel guilty for experiencing even a moment of lightness when his own daughter was gone. One afternoon, Helona stood very still near the cabin, staring toward the dirt road. Her posture was rigid, frightened. "Someone's coming," she whispered, pulling Nahuel closer. "What if it's my family? What if they want to take him away?" Dakota placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "No one is taking him. I won't let that happen." A truck appeared, old and battered. An elderly woman climbed out, moving with careful stiffness. She carried a basket covered with checkered cloth. Dakota recognized her immediately. Martha, from the general store. "Hope I'm not intruding," she called out. "I'm Martha Begay. Deputy Carson mentioned you might be out here. I brought some things." She set the basket down. "Fresh eggs, vegetables from my garden, some preserves." Her eyes found Halona's face, and something passed between them, a recognition of shared experience. "You've been through something difficult, haven't you, dear?" Martha's voice was gentle. Halona nodded wordlessly, tears filling her eyes. Martha moved closer and peeked at baby Nahuel. "Oh, he's beautiful." She glanced at Dakota. "You're doing a good thing here. Takes a strong person to extend kindness when the world's been unkind to you." She pulled out a card. "This is my personal number. If you need anything at all, you call me." Before leaving, she paused. "Silver Creek might be small, but we take care of our own. You've been coming to my store, fixing up this place. That makes you part of our community now." As Martha's truck disappeared, Halona let out a breath. "I thought she would judge me." Dakota watched the dust settle. "Not everyone is like your family. Some people still remember what kindness looks like." That night, the walls they had carefully maintained began to crack. Halona told him more about her dreams before everything fell apart. He found himself sharing memories of Ayita and Kimimela, speaking their names aloud for the first time since their deaths. "Do you think they would approve?" Halona asked softly. "Your wife and daughter. Do you think they would want you to be here, helping us?" Dakota considered the question seriously. "Yes. Ayita always said that healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means finding ways to carry love forward, even after loss." His voice roughened. "I'm not healed. I don't know if I ever will be. But maybe helping you and Nahuel is a way of honoring their memory." Halona wiped her eyes. "We're all broken here. But maybe broken people can help each other become whole again." Outside, the desert night wrapped around the cabin. Dakota listened to distant coyote calls and thought about survival, about the unexpected ways life persisted even in the harshest conditions. He had come carrying nothing but endings, but somehow, impossibly, he had stumbled into the beginning of something new. Months passed, and the desert witnessed a quiet miracle. The abandoned cabin that once held only ghosts now rang with the sounds of life. Nahuel grew stronger, his laughter filling spaces that had known only silence. Halona transformed from a frightened girl into a confident woman, her hands no longer trembling, her eyes no longer searching the horizon with fear. Dakota became something he never expected to be again. Not a father exactly, but a protector, a teacher, a man with purpose. The community of Silver Creek embraced them without demanding explanations. Martha brought meals and wisdom. Other families offered clothes, toys, friendship. Deputy Carson stopped by occasionally, not with suspicion, but with genuine care, checking if they needed anything. One afternoon, a car appeared on the dirt road. Halona recognized it immediately, her body going rigid. Her family had found her. Dakota stood beside her as her father stepped out, his face tight with complicated emotions. Behind him, her mother emerged, eyes red from crying. "Halona," her father said, his voice strained. "We've been searching. We made a terrible mistake. Please come home." Halona held Nahuel close, her chin lifting with newfound strength. "I am home," she said quietly but firmly. "You told me I brought shame. You turned your backs when I needed you most." She looked at Dakota, then at the cabin they had rebuilt together. "But I found family anyway. Real family. The kind that stays." Her mother reached out desperate. "We were wrong. Please forgive us. Maybe someday," Halona replied, her voice steady despite the tears. "But Nahuel and I don't need you anymore. We have everything we need right here." Her father's shoulders slumped in defeat. They stood there for a long moment before returning to their car and driving away, carrying their regret with them. After they left, Dakota placed a gentle hand on Halona's shoulder. "That took courage." "You taught me courage," she answered. "You taught me that family isn't just blood. It's who shows up when you're broken and helps put the pieces back together." That evening, as the sun painted the desert in gold and crimson, Dakota sat outside, holding Nahuel. The baby grabbed his finger with surprising strength, those innocent eyes looking up with complete trust. Dakota felt tears on his face, but they weren't tears of grief anymore. They were something else entirely. He thought about Ayita and Kimimela, not with the crushing weight of loss, but with gentle gratitude for the time they had shared. He thought about the man who had driven here months ago, carrying death in his heart. That man seemed like a stranger now. "I came here to die," he whispered to Nahuel, who cooed softly in response. "But you and your mother, you gave me something to live for. You reminded me that even broken things can be beautiful, that endings can become beginnings." Alona joined them, sitting close, and together they watched night claim the desert. 3 people who had been lost, now found. 3 people who had been broken, now healing. Not a perfect family, but a real one. Built not on blood or tradition, but on something stronger. On choice. On love. On the stubborn refusal to give up when the world said there was nothing left worth fighting for. The stars emerged one by one, infinite and eternal, watching over a cabin that had been purchased for death, but had instead become a cradle for life. And in that moment, Dakota understood the greatest truth of all. Sometimes salvation doesn't look like we expect. Sometimes it comes wrapped in the cry of a baby, in the desperate eyes of a young mother, in the choice to stay when every part of us wants to leave. Sometimes, the life we